Have you ever felt lonely? Like nobody else in the world could possibly understand what it's like to sit where you sit, to see what you see, and to feel what you feel? This feeling of loneliness is so hard to reckon with. Today's episode looks at this idea in a whole new way. I just wanted to say that I think you're going to love this episode. Our guest is smart, spiritual, and funny, and this conversation is just so sacred. Hey, I want you to know how glad I am that you're here listening. I want you to know that, it really means the world to me that you'd take the time to push play and be a part of this conversation. I'm so glad you're here. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Between Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Mattson. I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. Dr. Kelly Flanagan is an author, speaker, relationship coach, and licensed clinical psychologist. He writes regularly on his blog. We'll link to his blog in the show notes, and we'll probably talk about it later on. His writing has been featured in Reader's Digest, Christianity Today, and The Five Love Languages. He's appeared on the Today Show with his daughter. That's a cool little tidbit. Kelly's two nonfiction books, Lovable and True Companions. You can search for those on whatever bookstore you can find online right now. Lovable and True Companions. Both of those books debuted as #1 new releases in the interpersonal relations category on Amazon, which is a huge deal. His first novel, which is titled The Unhiding of Elijah Campbell, was an ECPA bestseller and has won multiple literary awards. Kelly is married to another clinical psychologist named Kelly. That's right. And they have three children who are now, I think, 20, 16, and 14 years old. They live in a small town outside of Chicago. Kelly, to start, I want to say that I loved your book, True Companions. This book is it's about companionship, which, by the way, that word companionship is a word we could just unpack for an hour, I'm sure, together right now.
Hmm.
But and
Right.
why we don't use it enough in like daily life. Companionship is a heavy word, a beautiful word. But this book, True Companions, is a book rooted in faith, but it's placed squarely in the real, most important relationships of our lives. It's a book that honestly, it challenged my sense of the idea of loneliness. It's a book
Mm.
that is kind of about healthy marriages, as you've got these beautiful like letters to your wife throughout it,
Mm.
which is just a gorgeous way to write. But it's about a lot more than that. Like I think you started to write about healthy marriages, but it became a lot more than that. It's a fantastic book. I'm just so glad you're here, Kelly.
Thank you for having me here. I'm thrilled to be in this between space with you to get to talk about companionship.
Yeah, let's talk about companionship. So, an easy way for us to start, I often like to ask our guests to maybe jump into story time, sacred story time. We like to start by
Mm.
asking people to tell a story from their life about a
Mm.
moment of sacred human connection. There's a bunch of those stories scattered
Mm.
throughout the book True Companions, but I don't know. We believe the most sacred space on earth is the space between us. Do you have any stories like that you could share?
Mm. Boy, sacred story time is a great title for it because it just puts you in a totally different mindset,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah.
A sacred story of togetherness. I mean, the one that comes to mind immediately for me, and I struggle with how to tell this story to not diminish it. It's sort of my road to Damascus story. Happened in 2008. I was um, I was licensed as a clinical psychologist. Finally, had a beautiful wife and two boys, and I was clinically depressed. And I was burning out my marriage, and I was struggling because I'd sort of achieved everything I thought I wanted to achieve, and it wasn't doing inside of me what I thought it would do, which in hindsight was to make me feel like I was good enough and
Mm,
to make me feel like I was worthy of being loved and of belonging. I was sort of demanding that my wife make me feel that way,
mm.
which, by the way, that's a great way to ruin a date night. Is demand that your partner make you feel great. Um, so anyhow, I went into 2008 with a New Year's resolution to quit reading books about getting better and to actually start practicing some of the things I've been reading about: regular prayer, regular contemplation, mindfulness, meditation. And that sort of built on itself to the point where we were on a Marine base, Quantico, for my wife's sister's wedding, and it was Father's Day weekend. My wife had been a fantastic bridesmaid that weekend, which meant she was giving a lot of attention to her sister and not to me. And I was in a snit about that, and I was frustrated. And but I had developed this set of practices where when I could feel that inner storm brewing, I would just try to abide with it rather than making it go away. Try to listen for, as Henry Nouwen says, the voice of love, the inner voice of love within us, to try to listen for the voice of God in there speaking to me. And I woke up Father's Day morning, the morning after the wedding, all sorts of frustrated. Like, this isn't how I want to spend my Father's Day, in a hotel and now packing up a car and driving and all of that stuff. But I got quiet, um, and I tried to listen for a different voice within me. And for the very first time in my life, I heard a voice within me say, Kelly, I'm especially fond of you. I always have been. You're my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. And I recognize that as the same voice that Jesus heard as he came up out of the river Jordan at his baptism. Um, and again, it's hard to describe for me because, you know, um, I suppose Saul turned Paul probably walked around and told people about this voice he heard on the road. And they're like, "Ah, there's a voice in your head, dude." It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Until you hear it, it's really hard to describe that. You
Yeah.
just know it's not you. And so the next thing that voice in me said was, get out of bed, go downstairs to the lobby and spend some time with me. Like, that's your gift on Father's Day. So I threw my legs over the side of the bed. I stood up. I felt like a weight that had been on me for as long as I could remember sort of was shed. And I remember looking back at the bed and being like, I've been in a prison cell that I thought was locked from the outside. It was locked. It was open all along. Like,
Wow.
I could walk out of this thing whenever I choose, this sort of prison cell of identity and anger and resentment and stuff. So I go down to the lobby. This is where the sense of togetherness kicks in. I go down to the lobby thinking that my morning's going to be spent in more quiet prayer and contemplation. I walk into the lobby, and the desk clerk is on her hands and knees cleaning up a pool of vomit.
Mm.
And literally the day before, the version of me that was showing up to life would have thought, "Oh my gosh, this is disgusting. This is going to ruin my time with God." and and instead, sort of, I had this deep sense that if God was in me, God was in her. That we were one and the same. That her struggle in this moment was my struggle, and I offered to help her clean up the mess, which she politely declined. She'd get fired if she let a guest do that, right? So I went and I sat down and I started to close my eyes and I started to pray. And it was really early. It was like 4:30 in the morning, dark out, and the doors opened and someone came through the entryway. And I heard the woman get up and rush over the door. I looked up. She was sort of helping this woman across the lobby. This woman was struggling to walk. And so I hopped up, and I helped sort of get her into the elevator, and she went up. And the desk clerk said, she last night her husband forced her to load their whole moving truck, and she miscarried their baby last night. And I got her to the emergency room last night, and she's coming back from that. Um, and I think what I'd say is that for the first time in my life, I spent my whole life trying to avoid my own pain, let alone other people's pain. And for the
Yeah.
first time in my life, that pain she was going through felt like a source of connection to her rather than something that I wanted to avoid. Um, I went back to my chair, continued praying, still thinking that, like, my point of being there is to, like, find God inside of me. And my eyes are closed and I hear, "Good morning." I open my eyes. There's this boy sitting in front of me, big blue eyes, I'll never forget. And he says, "Hi." And I'm like, okay, ugh, got my own kids waking up, but okay, I'll say hi. Turns out this kid had just lost his father. His father was a soldier and his dad had passed. This is his first Father's Day without a dad. And so he and I start talking, and I realize, again, my point of being there is to be there with him and for him. And it was pretty beautiful. By the time I left the lobby that morning, like, all these older folks had come in and they were sort of surrounding him. He had this sort of makeshift family, And I would say that that was the moment in my life where I really, for the first time, felt like I could be together with other human beings, um, fully together in whatever it was, not sort of picking and choosing. I'll be together with you in this, but not in this thing, right? But I can be together with you all in anything, and that clarity has come and gone. It's become
Mm.
hazier at times over the years. That was 15 years ago, but that's sort of the North Star experience that continues to anchor me in my sense of togetherness for sure.
Wow, man, that uh, when we talk about moments of sacred human connection, they sometimes look like what people expect them to look like, right? They sometimes
Right,
look like
right.
a long conversation in with my
Hmm.
pastor at the back of the
Hmm.
church, and or they look like, I don't know, they look really predictable. They
Hmm.
don't typically look like a hotel
Hmm.
staff cleaning up puke, followed by a woman
Hmm.
who is in real pain after losing a child, and then a little kid walks in and
Hmm.
stares at you in the face. Meanwhile, you're trying to find God, and God walked up to you in three different ways.
That's right.
What a wow, what a story, man.
Yeah, and I can't take a lot of responsibility, sort of ownership of it. It felt like something that was happening to me.
Yeah.
And but you do hear this from time to time from people. Thomas Merton comes to mind, corner of Fourth and Walnut.
Mhm.
Having this
Mhm.
moment where he suddenly feels deeply connected to everybody, even these strangers. And says, they're all walking around shining like the sun. I wish I could tell them that they're all walking around shining like the sun, and that was sort of the experience for me that day. And in my yeah, increasingly I'm aware that until I can be connected with the stranger in their pain, I can't actually be fully connected
Yeah,
to myself, to my wife, to my kids, because my connection is too selective. If I'm not ready to be connected to everything, to the whole human experience. So that really set me on my way. It changed my life.
I'm sure it did. It's clear your faith is important to you. The book, True Companions,
Mm,
for anybody listening who's thinking about picking up this book, I don't think most people would pick up this book and like immediately think it's a Jesus book. You know what I mean? Or it's a
mm,
faith-filled book. It doesn't show up that it doesn't like kind of hit you over the head with
right.
faith, but faith is in there, and
Hmm.
it's in there in this I think really accessible way. Actually, um I found, oops, sorry. I found a passage. I just knocked myself in the head with your book as I was trying to
Hmm.
get it over in front of me. I found this passage that I wanted to maybe read and have you reflect on. Are you okay if I read this little
Yeah, of
passage back
course.
to you?
Yeah, thank you.
This is again in True Companions. It says, you wrote, I've had a long and complicated relationship with God. I don't remember the early years of my life when I suspect God felt as close to me as my breath. Few of us do. Memories tend to begin later. My memories of God begin in a church. It was a small church that made God seem small. It was a scared church that made God seem scary. Of course, as a kid, I did not understand the God I was being given was shaped like the insecurity of those giving him to me. That passage, I
Mm,
kind of re came across that passage this morning as I was re kind of going through the things that I'd highlighted in your book, and I was like, wow, that idea of having been given a faith that is shaped like the insecurity of the people giving it to you,
mm,
especially as a kid, and then carrying around some of that insecurity or some of that stuff throughout
mm,
your life until your faith grows and until your faith evolves and until your faith
mhm.
develops. I'm curious about your faith journey, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit, from that small scared church that you mentioned in the book to, man, all the way through that experience 15 years ago to today. I gotta believe your faith has experienced a journey.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that passage. Like it helps me to understand my own story better actually when you put it that way, because I think right up until that moment on that Marine base, I was still carrying forward the same images of God,
Mm.
the small and scary images of God. And if anything has shifted for me before and after that, I think so. As Christians, I think so much of our faith hinges upon our understanding of what Jesus is talking about when he says the kingdom of heaven.
Hmm.
And in that church I grew up in, and again, a well-intentioned church, um, a church that I believe was probably necessary in my life too, right? I mean, we need structure before we can undo our structure in some
Yeah.
ways, and so, but in that church, the kingdom of heaven was a place that happened after this life and elsewhere. Um, and our job was to try to get to that place. And there was a rule book that told you how to basically get to that place and to hopefully try to get other people to that place as well. Right. That was the point. I think what I experienced on that Marine base more closely resembles how I understand Jesus to be talking about the kingdom of heaven, because he says it again and again. The kingdom of heaven is here. The kingdom of heaven is now. He seems to suggest that we can have access to that kingdom, that it is less a place and more of an experience,
Hmm.
less a place to get to and more a way of being right now. And for me, um, if I had to say, what is the kingdom of heaven? It's the experience of togetherness. It's the experience of unity. It's the illusion of separateness being lifted from us, and realizing that we are all a part of something bigger than ourselves. It's definitely what happened at that Marine base. I never thought about it like that, but I experienced what I felt like was the kingdom of heaven in a totally different way for the first time, and it made it impossible for me to go back to
Wow.
thinking of the kingdom of heaven as, ironically, a much smaller place somewhere else in some other time. Yeah.
The kingdom of heaven is togetherness. That is, you're speaking my language. That is, you fit well here in the between community.
Right on.
Well said. I want to, so confession time. I've only read True Companions. I've got a
Sure.
copy of your novel, The Unhiding of Elijah
Yeah.
Campbell, but I haven't cracked it open yet. I'm excited to. I
Yeah.
just haven't gotten there yet. Um, and your other book, Lovable, I think that was maybe your first book. Lovable was your first
Hmm.
book. Mhm.
It was the first one. Yep.
So uh maybe give me some spoilers. What are the themes that I'll encounter? All three of these
Mm.
books written by the same person, two nonfiction, one novel. That had to be
Hmm.
exciting to have written a novel.
Yeah.
Like that's a departure, that's a risk, that's
Yeah.
hard to do, I'm sure. But what
Right.
are the themes that you find yourself coming back to in your writing, or maybe even in your work as a
Mm.
psychologist?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that. Just this morning, I was reading Stephen Pressfield is an author of fiction and nonfiction and sort of a creative guru, and he says it's really not until the end of a creative's life that they can look back at their body of work and understand what they were really trying
Yeah,
to say. Like it's a
yeah.
collective, right? So if I had to guess at it, at what I hope is an early stage of my creative career, I think more and more I do have a sense that um, I am trying to, I'm working my way and therefore helping my readers work their way toward understanding our experience of loneliness, what it is, and how in our attempts to become unlonely, we actually create extra unnecessary separation. Um, and how, like for instance, in Lovable, um, I explore the way that our experience of shame separates us from people. That when we begin to believe that we're not good enough for connection, we then hide ourselves away. That's our sort of our solution or our answer to
Yeah.
that. Okay, well, if I'm going to be judged deficient, I'm just going to hang out, retreat, and hang out inside of here, and protect myself against that painful moment of being judged. And so, ironically, in our attempt to not be judged uh, deficient for connection, we actually eliminate any possibility for connection. We go into hiding.
Hmm.
So, shame is one of the experiences that sort of triggers us to do that. In True Companions, I wanted to explore how loneliness can be experienced apart from shame, and as an experience that can actually deepen our connection with ourselves and other people if we understand it correctly. And then in Unhiding, I think I'm exploring what it looks like when, how does a person, how do they develop the habit of hiding from their people when what they want more than anything is to be connected?
Mm.
How do you still end up getting caught in that trap of hiding? And then what does it look like to face the story that led to that happening and begin to build a different to tell a different story with your life. So over the course, and this is what I love about fiction, right? You get to follow one character's story over the
Yeah.
course of time in a relatively short period and get to see how that plays out. And I wanted to depict that in a really authentic way. That was my goal.
Hmm. In your on your website, I spent some time on your website, kind of clicking around, and I watched some videos and found some other just resources that you provided for your clients, your coaching clients, your therapy clients. Um, you talk about three concepts: worthiness, belonging, and
Mm,
purpose. And at one point in one of the videos, you said the secret is in the sequence, really
mm,
helping people connect with their sense of worthiness, helping people find belonging, and then helping people
mm,
find purpose. And I think you were saying in that particular order. I
correct.
found I found those themes throughout True Companions in a
Mm,
number of different ways. And it's funny. I asked the question about the books, thinking that you were going to give me that answer, thinking you were going to give me your,
interesting.
your 3 part thing. But I loved that you didn't. I love that there were layers underneath that. But I'm curious. I'm actually
Yeah.
curious about those three things: worthiness, belonging, and purpose,
Yeah.
as just core human needs that I think a lot of us don't honor or don't ever, get fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The that sequence is reflected in True Companions as
Hmm.
well. So you mentioned the Today Show.
Yeah.
Ironically, it was 10 years ago last week, I think
Yeah.
it was, coincidentally, that my daughter and I were on the Today Show, and we had this incredible experience. Just by dumb luck or sheer blessing, my boss was vacationing with Philip Yancey at the time, great Christian author. And they watched the appearance on the Today Show. And Philip Yancey said, I'm going to connect him with my agent. So I got connected with this incredible literary agent. Her name is Kathy. And she said, all right, Flanagan, these you're having these letters to your kids go viral. Maybe you should write a parenting book. Maybe this should be your first book. And so I went home to my wife, who's the child psychologist in our family. I'm
Yeah.
an adult psychologist. And she's like, dude, you got no business writing a parenting book. And she's right. Um, and so anyways, it got us talking in more depth about why exactly people were responding to the letters to my kids.
So
And
that's why you were on the Today Show. There were these letters that you were posting on social
yep,
media or something that went
yeah,
viral, like went crazy.
yeah, 3 years after that experience on the Marine base, as I would say, I got connected enough with who I really am, not this persona I built over time, to realize I really wanted to write. And so I started blogging, and wrote a couple letters to my kids and posted them on my blog. And one was to my daughter about how her deepest beauty is on the inside. And that went like wildly viral,
Yeah.
and so the Today Show called, we wound up on there. And so afterwards I'm going, my wife and I are like, okay, so if it's not the parenting part of these letters that's appealing to people, what is it? And I realized that I was getting thousands of emails at the time, and they were all saying, they weren't saying I'm going to save this letter for my daughter, or I'm going to write one like this for my granddaughter. They were adult men and women saying I needed to hear these words.
Oh wow.
I needed to be reminded that I matter, that I'm worthy, that I'm not alone, that I have a reason for being here. And so it started to dawn on, we all got a little kid inside of us still that's waiting on a love letter. And
Mm.
that became sort of the theme of Lovable. So I start to send ideas related to that theme to Kathy, my agent. And one day she says, I keep seeing three themes here: worthiness, purpose, and belonging. Um, why those three themes? And I said, oh, no, no, no. It's not worthiness, then purpose, then belonging. It's worthiness, then belonging, then purpose. That's
Mm.
sort of the trajectory through which we grow over and heal over and over again. And she's like, well, that's the book. That's
Yeah.
Lovable. Is how this sequence of um, deepening, growing into a deeper sense of our worthiness, because it's only from a place of worthiness that we can really reveal ourselves and be vulnerable in
Mm.
relationships and show up. So as we begin to grow into a sense of worthiness, then we can show up in a way. And then belonging isn't like I've got to go out and create this thing. It's just, hey, here I am, and sort of seeing who gets excited about that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay. So we belong to each other, it seems. And then with that foundation of belonging, people who really believe in us and know us for who we are and what we love and what we're passionate about, then we can sort of, with the support of that community, really launch ourselves into doing what we're most passionate about in the world.
Wow.
I see that when people try to get into that purpose piece before they've sort of solidified the relational piece, it often results in some sort of burnout, disappointment. But when that belonging is really solid, it really forms a solid foundation for pursuing our purpose. So worthiness, then belonging, then purpose. The inner work, the relational work, and then the vocational work, essentially.
That is that's really powerful. It also makes me think about this sense of inauthenticity that I think people find themselves feeling sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I don't want to act like I know what I'm talking about here, but maybe it's because they skipped the worthiness part, went right tried to find belonging before they had a sense of internal worthiness, a sense of
Mm-hmm.
internal strength and confidence in who they were. And when you do that, you look for belonging anywhere in anybody who will give it to you, and you'll shape yourself to them. You'll shape yourself to those communities, those groups
Yes.
that offer that belonging. I mean, we could go deep into like all the problems that causes both individually and societally, right? Like we could point to that in a lot of places.
Well, and you're exactly right. And anybody who's listening who's like, oh no, have I not showed up authentically in my relationships? Like, yeah, no, you haven't. None of us have. None of
Yeah.
us do.
Yeah.
This is my life work, and 10 times today I won't show up authentically.
Yeah.
We are, and one of the things we talk about in Lovable is it's not just this one time only trajectory from worthiness to belonging to purpose. But then, as we begin to explore what we want to do in the world, our sense of worthiness gets called into question all over again, and
Mhm.
we cycle through that trajectory over and over and over again. So we're deepening over the course of our lives our sense of authenticity. So it's an ongoing process, not a one and done sort of thing. So everybody who's listening is somewhere in that process.
Yeah.
What we typically see is that um, kids are super authentic, and then they get hurt and they go, "Oh, this doesn't feel good to be me. I'm going to have to bury me and build a self that's a little bit safer out in the world." That usually starts around age 4 or 5 for
Mhm.
most kids, even in the best of childhoods. And that continues oftentimes, usually in early adulthood and midlife. And the way I understand a midlife crisis is that a midlife crisis is that moment when I was set up for one at the Today Show, by the way, right? Because I've gotten all the way. I've checked all the boxes, like I've done everything, and and a midlife crisis is when we double down on the false self and the inauthenticity that's gotten us there. Going,
Yeah.
well, maybe if I had more of this, or if I was this much stronger, or I was this much. A midlife awakening is when we go, oh, no, 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 no. This isn't about becoming more of what I'm not. It's about beginning to really accept who I am and developing the courage to show that in the world. And that's a midlife awakening. And I
Yeah.
think we all got that opportunity at any point when we start to realize that.
Huh. I want to dive into loneliness because it was the thing in this book that challenged me the most. And I would guess I'm
Mhm,
not alone amongst your readers. First off, let's start this way. I mean, I think part of the reason I'm so passionate about this Between project, this podcast, and the global ministry that we have is that I see, I'm not the only person. There's, the Surgeon General calls it a loneliness epidemic. Loneliness is
mhm,
bad out there. People feel lonely, they feel disconnected, they feel lost, and I can see it, and I know that feeling, and I want to help. I want to help bring people
mhm,
together. I want to give people more moments of real connection.
mhm,
And you start off, I mean, the first third of this book is a it's like
mhm,
a song of the beauty of loneliness. And I was almost
mhm,
confused for the first little bit.
mhm,
I was confused. I was my brow was furrowed. I wasn't quite sure what I was reading. And then,
mhm,
man, like you uncovered for me a whole new way of understanding loneliness.
mhm,
Um, there's a section there's a section that maybe I'll read to set up a little what I experienced. It's a short little
Hmm.
paragraph. You wrote this: loneliness happens. It is as much a part of our life as hunger and sunsets and funerals. It is simply what happens when we grow up and realize we have a universe inside of us to which no other person has access, and that every other person contains an unknowable universe as well. Oh, that,
Hmm.
that.
Yeah,
Will you
right.
expand on that for me? Like, can we live there for a little while? Will you dive into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think somewhere in there I write that loneliness is the shadow side of our uniqueness.
Mm,
Um, that our uniqueness is something that is beautifully given to us. We're one of a kind, um, and and uh, and because of that, there's literally no other person on the planet that can understand us. You know, we've got our who we are, our story. It's complicated and difficult for anyone to understand. We've got the nature of how we sort of showed up in the world, ourself that's difficult to understand for other people. I mean, the best. I'm writing this book, right? And when I write books, I feel um, I I benefit from what I don't do is I don't go out and read other books about the topic. I go out and I like watch videos and read books about the creative process just to feel a little bit less alone in how messy it is.
yeah.
So one day I was sort of doing it. I was avoiding writing and I'm watching this video. By this guy named Jack Antonoff is pretty famous now, but he wasn't back then. A musical producer, and he's talking about all the ins and outs of creating this song. My wife gets home from work. And I'm like, you gotta watch this video. It's amazing. Now my wife, like, she's so supportive of me and my career and everything I do. And I start to show her the video, and she's just like, do I have to watch this? Like, this is like, I'm not interested, right? And and I'm like, in that moment, because I'm working on this book, like typically I might be like, oh, you don't care about me, you don't love me, you're not interested, you're distracted. It was just like, oh, she's just never gonna be able to understand this creative side to me. That's not in her, right? And that's okay. I just get to be lonely in that with her. That's not something that I have to hold her accountable for. Certainly, I can make an effort to help her understand it better, and she can make an effort to hold space to try to understand it better. But it will only be we'll never reach that horizon where I feel understood in that,
Mm,
right? And so loneliness, I think, is just sort of an artifact of the fact that we are unique, and our attempts to sort of to remove that experience end up doing great violence to our relationships, great damage to our connection. And so I often say these days, instead of thinking of it as like holding your loneliness out to someone to take away from you, instead hold it up to show it to them,
mm.
and then have your companions hold up their loneliness to show to you, and then all of a sudden you actually do have something in common. We're both lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got that in common. We don't have to we don't have to try to sort of hold each other responsible for taking it away completely. And now we have an open line of communication.
Mm. That idea that nobody else, whether we like it or not, it is non-negotiable that nobody else can see the world, experience the world through the way that we see the world and experience the world.
Hmm.
That can be, I mean, I could take that and it could really bring me down. I mean, I think that it
Hmm.
does, right? I think that
Yeah.
sometimes that feeling of knowing that nobody else knows this, nobody else can see this, no
Hmm.
matter how hard I try, I can't have somebody take it from me. Like that is
Right.
part of the human experience. But there's something so beautiful about the idea that, well, if that's true for you, then that's true
Hmm.
for the other person that you're trying to become a companion with too, or you're
That's
just
right.
interacting with, or you just see on the street. They too feel that. And as
That's right.
soon as we recognize that about each other, we're not we're not alone. We're not we
Right.
may be lonely, but we're not alone. Kelly, that is
Yes.
that no kidding. This to me is I'm still like I'm saying these out loud, like I'm processing this right now. I
Mm,
told you before we started recording that I talked about this with my wife the other night at the dinner table. I was like,
mm,
honey, like I'm still trying to wrestle with this because
mm,
I think loneliness, I've thought loneliness is bad,
hmm.
but maybe it just is. Maybe it just
Yeah.
is. And
Yeah.
I added the bad to it. And anyway, sorry, I'll keep
Well, and I
rambling
know we're
because
going to
this is,
talk about I know we're going to talk about three experiences that do feel bad,
yeah.
that I had to differentiate in the book. But I think a useful distinction right now to mention too is you can sort of think of relationship as falling into three different lanes. One lane is codependency,
Mhm.
codependence. The other lane, second lane is independence, and then a third lane is interdependence.
Mhm.
So in codependence, we have that ongoing struggle to get the other person to take away our feelings of loneliness. I need you to do something to make me feel better in here,
Yeah.
right? And once we start to discover that that's not possible, right, and it's doing damage to the relationship, we can sometimes swing to the opposite extreme of independence. Okay, I'm lonely, you're lonely, you guys deal with your own loneliness, I'll deal with mine, you know, like not my problem,
Yeah.
basically. Um, but the reality is that deep companionship happens in that center lane of interdependence, which is you're lonely and there's nothing I can do to take that away completely, but I sure want to ease it as much as I can.
Mhm.
I'd sure love to see you as well as I can, understand you as well as I can, support you as well as I can, be there for it all as well as I can, and see how much of that I can be a part of diminishing for you. That's interdependence, right? And I think that ends up being a source of deep connection because you're not fighting each other for total relief. You're also not separating from each other, like giving up. Well, there's nothing I can do for you. You're actually just sort of trying to find that sweet spot of interdependence in the middle.
Hmm. So if it's not the loneliness epidemic that's killing us, or perhaps that's a misnomer, there is something that is hurting a
Yeah.
whole lot of people out there right now, and we're using the word loneliness as a way to describe it because we can't quite figure out the right words. What are the right words? What is killing us? What's
Mm.
the epidemic that is taking over society at the moment and feels like it's getting worse?
Yeah, well, I think the short answer to that is that it's isolation, not
Hmm.
loneliness. Um, that uh, and there was just an article published somewhere yesterday, maybe it was the Atlantic. It said the title of it was "End the Phone-Based Childhood,"
Hmm.
right? And so what we actually see is that when time spent together in the same space with someone, enjoying the same things. Those are the three ingredients to me. Same at the same moment in the same space, enjoying the same things. When that is replaced by a phone where you're engaging asynchronously with people, not in the same room with them, um, or maybe even you're in the same room, you're in the same time and same space, but you got 12 kids on 12 different devices
Yeah.
consuming 12 different experiences. It's not togetherness, right? That's isolation, even when you're in the same room with somebody. And so I think it's this experience of isolation, and what we're seeing, and this is the mental health of children in particular, who are so dependent upon togetherness and the forming of their identity, and the forming. I mean, the importance of peers from the ages of 12 to 22 is
Yeah.
just dramatic. Um, what we're seeing is that right around the time that our devices became ubiquitous for teenagers, their mental health just plummeted and it hasn't recovered. Anxiety, depression, suicidality. And more, I think we're starting to become aware that that traces back to the isolation those devices create. So, what's interesting is this is interesting. Kids feel more understood than they've ever felt because they can go online and they can, like, in my hometown of 15,000 people, my sample size is small. The
Yeah.
chances of me finding somebody that's a lot like me and understands me, pretty small. I go on the internet, I've got like 4 billion people I can connect with. They feel more understood than ever. So their loneliness, I would argue, is actually lower.
Wow.
Their
Yeah.
isolation is greater.
Oh,
And so
wow.
we have an isolation epidemic. Um, and and unfortunately, a lot of us parents, I'm as guilty as anybody, actually have sort of like enabled the isolation epidemic amongst our kids because when a kid is on the phone in their bedroom, they can't get pregnant, they can't drink and drive, they can't go out and do a dozen different things that are terrified they're going to
Yeah.
do, right? We're
Yeah.
like, okay, they're safe. I can go watch, I don't know, what's the show we're watching? This Is
Yeah.
Us. I can go watch This Is Us,
Yeah.
binge This Is Us while they're in their room. So to us, it feels safe and secure, but the reality is they're very isolated. And this extrapolates to adults as well. It's just that because of the importance of peer relationships in teenagers, we're getting to see those results of isolation magnified in that
Mhm.
group. but it's taking a toll on humans of every age.
Wow. This is a complete aside and not a very relevant point, but it's on my mind. I struggle sometimes. Your kids are older now. My kids are right in the heart of their teenage years right now. I got a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, and
Oh.
they are, sometimes my wife and I feel, I don't know, guilty or conflicted about having them engaged in youth sports. Youth sports are
Mm,
problematic on a lot of different levels, and we could talk about that for a
mhm,
whole hour. But there's a part of me that's like, yeah, but if they're not doing sports, I'm pretty sure I know what it looks like, what they're doing. And it looks like them being
that's right.
isolated on their phone. And so,
Mhm,
and there, it's not just sports, of course, but that happens to be the vehicle for us that I don't think I had words for it before, but like they're
mhm,
in the same place with their peers, enjoying the same activity at
mhm,
the same time, for a couple hours a night. That is
right.
that's actually a really important thing in their life when you put it that way. And I think that's what we feel instinctively, but I didn't really have words to understand, like to describe why it seems important. I just
Mm,
know that it's important, right?
you're right on, man. And like in writing this book, my valuing of youth athletics shot up as well.
Hmm.
I don't love the whole, yeah, because the way youth athletics has been framed is as an achievement to hopefully get something
Yeah,
knocked off your college
yeah,
costs,
yeah,
and that doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't resonate. But to see the way that youth athletics is a form of connection, and when you actually watch it through that lens, it's beautiful to
yeah,
watch. It
yeah,
really is. And then you can facilitate that experience within the athletic events as well, which is really cool. Yeah, it's essential. And one of the some of the data is showing that I don't want to. There's there's reason to be hopeful for parents, and one of the reasons to be hopeful is that as long as you don't replace that analog connection with digital connection,
yeah,
you can have digital connection as long as it's not a trade-off. So in other words, if you have 6 hours a week of analog connection and 6 hours a week of digital connection, that's okay.
yeah,
But if you have 12 hours a week of digital connection and zero of analog, or even six of digital and no analog, we need to keep the analog connection a part of our lives,
yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, we're going to shift topics a little bit. I'm going to ask you to translate some Greek for us. There are,
Mhm.
in the book, you do a great job of using words a lot of us are familiar with or vaguely familiar with. We've encountered in other ways, but sort of these four Greek concepts for love. And
Mhm.
you end up writing about the importance of the word philia, which I
Mhm.
know is sort of the root of Philadelphos. I know that word, this word that
Mhm.
means brotherhood, siblinghood, brotherhood, sisterhood, siblinghood.
Mhm.
Um, that plays a really important role in your book. That
Mhm.
concept of love. Will you go through? I mean, just briefly,
Sure.
those four concepts of love and why that one in particular is so important in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Greeks had four words for love. The first, well, not in any particular order, but one of the words was agape, which means unconditional love. Um, and honestly, that's the type of love that I set out to write this book about, was agape, unconditional love and lifelong companionship. Um, but started to run into the reality that the Greeks only used that word with regard to the gods or to God. It was seen as a love that is expected to come from the divine, um, but not necessarily a word that is um, a currency amongst us mortal creatures.
Hmm.
A love that's a currency. And the second kind of love is eros, which is it's the more sexual, the more physical, the more passionate, the more lustful sort of love. Often gets expressed in physicality, but it's just that quick burst of energy that we feel at the beginning of a relationship. And the Greeks saw that kind of love necessarily sort of tails off over the course of a relationship. And then storge is a third kind of love the Greeks identified, which is sort of the love of kinship. Like we are in the same tribe, we are of the same family. And so I love you in a familial sort of way, more as like a sense of identity, really, than anything else. And then there was this fourth love, philia, which again, brotherly love, the love of companionship. Um, and I had this moment in writing True Companions where I remembered that scene. Jesus has died and been resurrected. He shows up on the beach cooking breakfast for the
Yeah.
disciples who are out fishing in the boat. And he asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And I needed to test my own theory, my own sort of theology around
Yeah.
this, that God might be calling us to philia even more than agape. This gritty sort of human doing of life together, rather than this theoretical "I love you no matter what, but I can love you from way over here no matter what,"
Hmm.
right? And so I go to the actual Greek, and sure enough, Jesus, the first 2 times he asked Peter, "Do you love me?" He uses the word agape, and then the third time, the time that he's satisfied, he asks, "Do you philia? Will you philia? Will you walk with me? Will
Yeah.
you do life with me?" And I was like, yeah, that's the question Jesus is really asking of us. Not will we sort of unconditionally, theoretically love from a distance, but will we actually do life with each other in companionship? And so that's when the book really kind of coalesced around that idea and that way of caring for each other through life.
That's such a theologically, we could live in that for a while, right?
Right.
Because was Jesus asking that uh, as God, or was Jesus asking that third question as just Jesus, just this guy who has been through some stuff with these guys? You know what I mean? Like that to
Yeah.
me,
Oh
that
yeah.
feels like a really human, very,
Yeah.
very grounded question.
Yeah. Do you love me unconditionally, or do you love me as a friend? Are you my
Yeah,
friend, Peter? Are
yeah.
you my friend?
Oh,
Yeah. And powerful too. I mean, in a theological sense, because Jesus knows he's about to leave.
yeah.
So in other words, he's saying, "Will you be my friend even after I've left?" And
Hmm.
we know he eventually sends the Holy Spirit to come alongside us, as a companion as well. So yeah, it's a pretty powerful scene between the two of those two old buddies.
I can't help but also think about the idea of loneliness um, through my understanding of Jesus. Kind of nobody. I think about that scene, Jesus and Peter there, and how lonely Jesus
Mhm,
maybe felt. Right, like that.
mhm, mhm,
Nobody else can understand what I know, how I see the world,
mhm.
how I experience the world. I
Yep.
just want to know, Peter, like are you my friend? Like that,
Yeah.
not are you my follower? Are you my apostle? Are you my disciple? No, are you my friend? Like that is
Mhm.
there is something really uh relevant in all of our lives in that
Yeah.
question, in the loneliness that all of us feel, and in the just desire to know that I've got somebody here who's got my back, right?
Yeah, and like the way that boils down for me is just, do you want to do it with me? Do you want
Yeah,
to go through life with me? Like, are you, all the things again, the
yeah,
the good stuff and the painful stuff. You're ready to roll, and
yeah,
that's a beautiful thing about friendship is friends are ready to roll.
yeah. Kelly, what are you excited about right now? What are you working on? What's giving you energy? This has been a great conversation, by the way. I mean,
Uh,
I should pay you good money for my own therapy session that I just got. We got we went through some good stuff in here, man. But what are you working on right now?
uh,
What are you excited about?
thanks for that. Yeah, so I've got a sequel to The Unhiding of Elijah Campbell that's in the can, and looking for a publisher. But
Cool.
probably in terms of my energy right now, I'm working on a nonfiction book. It's um, tentatively working title. These things change so much, but
Yep.
it's called Open Hearted: Turning Conflict into Connection with a Single Choice. And it seeks to be a really practical book about this moment that repeats itself over and over again in our relationships. And in my work with couples, what I've learned is, couples have a wide array of communication tools available to them. Most couples are relatively good communicators, but they shut their toolbox when they need it the most.
Hmm.
They close the toolbox on their skills for communication, and it's this moment that their heart closes to their partner.
Yeah.
And if we can isolate that moment of closing and practically learn how to open back up, now we've opened up the path of connection
Wow.
again, the path of communication. So that I'm wildly excited about that right now. I was writing this morning. I had to tear myself away from it to come talk to you. It was worth it. Let me tell you, to come talk to you. But I'm pretty excited about that right now.
That's cool. That is, I I can viscerally resonate with that moment of closing. I mean, just think of any point of conflict I've had in
Hmm.
marriage or in any important relationship in my life. And uh,
Hmm.
boy, I'm excited about that book. That is that even just naming that moment
Just
and
naming
putting
it.
it, circling it, and knowing that it happens, and then being able to work around
Well,
it or work through it. That's
I was going
powerful.
to say, and practically, how about me telling you that the first earliest warning sign of that moment is a tension that you feel somewhere between your waist and your temples.
Oh well,
Like you can actually feel your heart closing
yeah.
in your body. And if you can feel it there first, you've given yourself a lot more emotional bandwidth to make a decision about it. So that's where we start off in the book.
Oh, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'll invite you back on. You don't have to come back on, but
Yeah,
if
I'd
it's
love
going to be a
to.
conversation like this, I'd absolutely love to dive back in, man. Where can people find you? I mentioned your blog. I'll put it in the show notes, but is that
Yeah.
the best place for people to find you? Where do people find you on the internet?
Yeah, there's really two places these days. So my website is drkellyflanagan.com, drkellyflanagan.com. And in terms of like, I blogged there for, I don't know, 11 years. And so it's a great place to access my archives. It's all still free. I'm doing all my online writing. It's on Substack,
Mhm.
actually, drkellyflanagan.substack.com. Yesterday's post, in fact, was, I post weekly, was the skyrocketing price of togetherness,
Oh
and
wow.
it was sort of reflecting upon how our our demand for togetherness is as high as it's ever been, but the supply of opportunities for togetherness is dropping, as we discussed,
Yeah,
and that's how I see the ridiculous ticket prices at concerts and these sort of things. And so in the post, we explore how to find some togetherness at bargain basement prices
I
still. And
love that.
as sort of a fun space in the comments there. So drkellyflanagan.substack.com.
I glanced at that article. I thought about bringing it up in our conversation today, but
Yeah.
the idea of the economics of togetherness is such a
Yeah.
fascinating thing, and that if we recognize that there is scarcity, and that changes the way we interact with each other, and we can look around for
Mhm.
evidence of it, it becomes fascinating, sometimes disheartening, but also I think
Mhm.
what you did in that article. Everybody go check out Substack, check out Kelly's Substack, because this there are bargain basement options for together. Like
Mhm.
there are deals still available.
Mhm.
Everybody, don't worry. We can still
Yeah.
find each other, as it turns out.
But you
Kelly,
probably won't find them alone with your phone in your bedroom,
no.
unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, that's the bad news about it. Kelly, thanks so
Right.
much for this, man. True
It was
Companions.
amazing.
This book was really meaningful for me. I so appreciate you putting this art into the world. Thanks, Kelly.
Mm. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, thanks to all you betweeners out there for listening to this episode of the Between Podcast. Make sure you visit between.church on the internet to sign up for our mailing list. That's probably the most important thing, our email list. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our 5-minute sermons, 5-ish minute sermons that we post every week. Follow us on social media. We got daily prayers. We got all sorts of other content. And join our community fully. We invite everyone. You are welcome here, no matter who you are or where you're from, no matter what you believe or even if you believe, no matter who you love or how you love, no matter what anybody else has ever told you about you. You are welcome and loved and celebrated here at Between. You know, my favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.